Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of B. Marshall, one-time member of the Crazies, a very short-lived band, but also the Sound on their first album and tour and that early years. Anyway, this is the interview, and just a bit of a word up. The Crazies recorded this session in December 1978, which also featured Pete Williams and various other members who were in the Outsiders, and some went on to form the Sound. So that includes Adrian Borland, Graham Bailey on bass, Adrian Janes on drums, and also B. Marshall on clarinet. And this was a recording that has just come out on Optic Nerve Records from Preston. It's titled A Simple Vision LP. And yes, is there any more interesting information? Yeah, you'll get the gist when you listen to this interview. So after several minutes of casual chat, we got down to that very exciting subject that was the early formative years. Make notes or take notes, because I will test you at the end. Make sure you are paying attention. Anyway, B, it's over to you.
I was lucky because I was brought up by my 18-year-old aunt, who was really into music. So I got into music really, really early. And I mean, I remember her buying records when I was 3-4 years old, and it would have been Helen Shapiro, Dusty Springfield, the Beatles. So I think the first band I ever really liked as a kid was the Beatles.
Yes.
And With the Beatles was the first album I think I ever had.
Yeah, nice. That's great. So did you, yes, a cool auntie. This is always quite handy, isn't it, really? Well, it is. It can be good. I mean, a lot of people...
I think she was desperate to keep me entertained, because I was probably quite a boisterous, 4-year-old, 5-year-old.
Yes.
And in those days, you had the cheapest way you could listen to music, new music, would be to go to a record shop and go into one of the listening booths.
Yes.
And actually have them play, the latest releases. I do have memories of going into listening booths with her and, hearing all this music. So yes. I think it was her influence that kind of got me interested really early on.
Yes. So were you quite... not just a busy child, but did you sort of get a musical instrument quite early in your life?
I had to learn the piano to get into the right state grammar school.
Right.
So my parents, so my parents kind of got me started. I think at about 8, I started learning the piano.
You learnt the scales. You sorted it out straight away, actually. No, yeah, sort of hot-housed, weren't you, at that stage in life?
I'm not sure it was helpful playing with any of the bands I played with, because none of the others could ever read music.
No, they're hopeless, aren't they? Just most bands have no idea, do they? I don't think I've hardly ever met an indie band who understood much about that side of life.
Well, it's difficult when you're jamming and you kind of... I mean, in a way, it's where... if you've been trained, you're so used to being told what key this is in. And it's a really weird feeling when you go into a jam session and you kind of go, they're all playing away and you're going, okay, well, what key are we in? And they go, well, I don't know. You'll have to find it.
Oh, bless them. Just bless their sort of amateur quality. It's interesting. I've done an interview with... There was one particular producer, and he was just saying that it was in, he sort of was in the UK most of the 70s and 80s and then went to America. But he said the difference was huge, actually, because the American musicians were really competent and had studied music really well. So, but it was also quite difficult because at times it was like we need to try and do something else, and they were quite stuck. I mean, if he suggested something a bit odd, they would go, no, that doesn't work at all. Sorry, we can't do that. And it's like, but an English British kind of musician would have gone, yeah, that's fine. Not understanding the theory or what, So they were quite rigid, and these were sort of people who, guitarists with Marilyn Manson who, had all the tattoos and had the LA rocker look, but at the same time could play amazing bluegrass music and all sorts of other instruments, because they'd studied it really religiously and then got the image, so it was he found it kind of frustrating basically, because it was like, this is quite boring, but I know English people would just go, yeah, I'll give that a go, without questioning the fact that this doesn't work. How can we do this? This is just against our teaching that we've been given, all the things we've been taught. So it's kind of interesting, because this country, which is tiny, isn't it, has produced a lot of quite interesting and amazing music, but it probably on paper shouldn't work.
No, and I think that's one of the things that can hamper you if you study classical music or you're taught classical music, is that it closes your mind to the happy accidents that actually will result in something very, very interesting.
Yes, I know.
Because as you say, you'll just think, oh, no, that's not going to work, without giving it a try.
Yes.
And often it's doing things, just going with your guts is probably better than, using your head too much.
Yes. Especially when you're 16 and probably smoked and drunk a lot as well. It just helps the creative flow, doesn't it? So as long as you remember to hit record and listen to it in the morning, so and work out which bits are worth it and which bits aren't. But that's the wonders of youth. So then, as you were sort of hitting 16, were you leaving school at that stage, or were you kind of...
No, I stayed on until I was 18. Then I went on to college to do a degree in psychology, which wasn't actually my choice. And that's kind of when I was introduced to Adrian Borland, Adrian Janes and Graham Bailey. Because there was a guy who was on my course, my psychology course. We'd been at school with the two Adrians, and we just happened to be talking about music. And he said, you've got a really weird taste in music. He said, but I've got a friend who's got a similar weird taste in music. I think I should put the two of you together.
And it worked. And
it worked.
And were you kind of, because mostly, I don't know, there's a bit of gender stereotyping here, but a lot of young boys, they're either going to be into football or into music in that kind of world. So were they, were they like, oh, we want to be in a band, we want to be in a band? Did they have that kind of quality about them that they were just like, we want to be in a band, we don't know what that means, but it looks like a good idea?
Well, they were already Adrian Janes, which I call Jan. We've always called Jan.
There's a lot of Adrians and Robs here, aren't there, in this kind of Pete's? That's the one. I don't know. There seems to be quite a few people with all the same names, which is quite irritating, isn't it? It's not their fault. It was their parents.
So I think Adrian Borland and Jan were already in the Outsiders, so they were already in the band with Bob Lawrence. And then shortly afterwards, I think Bob decided to go on to university, and then Graham stepped in and took over on bass. So yeah, they were already in a band. So there was none of this, we want to be in a band. They were already in a band when I met them.
Yes. And did you have sort of, like, actually, I want to be in a band as well? Had that sort of crossed your sort of mind at all? Or were you...
Never.
No.
Never.
Right. God, that's good. So when did you start playing clarinet, though? I mean, you mentioned piano.
The clarinet, I think by the time I did my debut with the Outsiders, I'd probably been learning for about 3 or 4 years. So again, at school, I actually wanted to learn the saxophone. Because it was an all-girls grammar school, we had no male teachers at all female teachers, and they couldn't find a female saxophonist to come and teach. The nearest they could offer me was clarinet.
God, that's so yes. Anyway, such a yes. I know these kind of moments, aren't they? They're small, but they could be huge, really, aren't they? Because
the interesting thing was that by the time I decided to learn, everybody had already raided the cupboard for the loan instruments, and the only one that was left was a metal clarinet.
Right.
And the school were really apologetic with, we're terribly sorry, but, that's all we've got left. And I said, well, fine, I wanted to play the saxophone. It looks like a soprano sax. Let's give it a whirl.
Yes, absolutely.
So I was quite happy that it's just a happy coincidence that metal clarinet was the last instrument left.
Yeah. Did you were you able to pick it up quite quickly? Oh, do you freeze?
Yes, it froze then, but is it back?
Yes.
Yes, because I think having learnt the piano, you're used to thinking about several notes at the same time. And then all of a sudden you're kind of, you're playing an instrument where all you have to concentrate is on producing one note at a time.
Yes.
And it seemed quite, next to the piano, it seemed quite easy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, that's good. That's good, and it's also got a beautiful sound to it. Because actually, with the band and this period that you enter the wonderful world that is these kind of chaps, is that so they were in the Outsiders, weren't they? But there was also another band called they were in, which was called Second Layer, which they then formed, and then there was this kind of the Crazies, which was kind of a day gig in a studio, and then it was the Sound, wasn't it? So did you enter? Were you just in? You weren't in the Outsiders, were you?
Towards the end, yes. I used to join them on stage for originally just a couple of tracks, and then as time went on, I think I worked my way up to about 4, 5, 6 songs that I came on and played with the Outsiders.
Yes, and this would have been the late kind of 70s, wasn't it? About 70, 78 time?
78, yeah.
Yes.
I met them at the end of 77, and I think I started playing with them in 78.
Yes. Did you go through a bit of a punk? What area and what place and what university did you go to?
Oh, no, I went to Poly in Northeast London.
My God, people wouldn't even know what that is, would they? Poly?
No, I think it's now the University of East London. No. But yeah, at the time it was called Northeast London Polytechnic.
Nice.
And it was near Stratford, East London.
So then from that, you have this session, which is what sort of Optic Nerve then sort of only, was it 43 years later, unearthed, which is the great sort of recording of the Crazies. So how did that sort of develop and happen at that stage? Can you kind of remember much about that sort of session?
I remember a lot about the recording session. And oddly enough, because we were given a cassette of it had always been in my collection. So it wasn't like suddenly hearing a great lost recording. I was just surprised that after that length of time, somebody was interested in actually releasing it. But, we'd all had cassettes the entire time. So.
Yes. And when you went in to do the recording, had there been much rehearsal and much kind of debate and thought about sort of what tracks you're going to be recording and such like?
Absolutely nothing. Because Pete was always coming up with these sort of schemes, and half the time they never amounted to anything. So when he first suggested that, would we be interested in writing music if he wrote a series of lyrics and then booked a studio, we kind of said yes, because we were all in the billet, which was a local pub, and, just a happy evening. And we said, oh, yeah, we'll do it. And what we didn't know is he went off, wrote the lyrics, booked the studio, and then the next time we saw him, he said, oh, by the way, the studio's booked for next week, and I've done all the lyrics.
Nice. That's very forward thinking.
So we were all a little bit apprehensive, because it's, oh my God, okay, well, we'll just have to see how it pans out.
Yes. And that was the sort of moment. And did you, at the time, we probably, as with most things, you just accept it because then you think this is normal. But then looking back, was there a sort of a sense of a bit of a, not genius, but was there kind of when you look at that scene, was there quite a creative, like you thought, yeah, some of that kind of time during those years was a very creative and kind of expressive moment?
No, because I guess then they're your friends. They're just your friends, and it's kind of like, oh, this is just another little project we're going to do. And Pete didn't have great ambitions for the Crazies. He just wanted to experience what it was like going into a studio, because he knew all the members of the Outsiders, and I think he was just curious as to what it was like.
Yeah.
And all he wanted to do was have a fun day. And, with a view of, making a few cassettes and giving them to his friends.
Yes, absolutely.
So it wasn't, it wasn't a big project. It was supposed to be just a fun day.
Yes. And then sort of so then how does the project then sort of get resurrected in 2021? When did you start to sort of the interest in this kind of recording come to light?
Well, I think because the interest in the sound has never actually totally gone away, and obviously the interest in projects that Adrian Borland worked on, a few times it has been mentioned, and then all of a sudden, I think it got picked up on as, this is something that maybe we should listen to.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was Adrian Janes, actually, who approached Cherry Red with some recordings, which I think had not come out. And I don't know exactly how it happened, but, Cherry Red seemed to think that Optic Nerve would be the ideal people to license the Crazies to.
Yes. Well, yes, I suppose because there was that amazing box set that came out about the Outsiders, which is just, I just kind of got a copy, and it's like, wow, you really have dug deep and got every possible recording from that kind of band, which is kind of a beautiful collection, really. I guess you must feel quite chuffed to see so much of what happened at that point in life archived and sort of, yes, giving some sort of, I don't know, platform to be heard and also seen on with the artwork.
Well, it's strange because I did a couple of years ago, I did an interview for Penny Black Music, and I mentioned the Crazies sort of then as, being one of the most enjoyable recording sessions that I'd ever kind of been in. And it kind of, in a way, that it was always just bubbling under, I think, the Crazies. Because I think for a lot of us, it was, for me, the sound was not a happy experience, but the Crazies was.
Yes, yeah, I know. I think actually I haven't done these interviews for so long. I realised that there is a sort of a good time to leave the band, or a good time to sort of do a Ziggy Stardust basically and say, that's it, let's forget it, because the next chapter might not be such a fun one as the one that we've just had. But you don't know that at the time, and there's always that hope, isn't there? So with doing this project for Optic Nerve, you've done the artwork as well, haven't you?
Yes.
And was
yes.
was that relatively easy? Because I'm guessing when you got the cassette of that recording, it was just one of those TDK cassettes with not much of a cover.
It's frozen.
Oh no! Don't. That's just tragic. Have I come back to life? It doesn't
yes,
say.
You come back to life.
Oh, thank God for that. Yes. So yes, doing the artwork, was there a lot of pressure to sort of put something together and to try and capture the band and also the essence of the music?
The artwork was kind of, there's something about my internet connection is unstable.
Oh, I hate when that says that, because it's like, don't tell.
Art is what I do. Art is what I do now. I always wanted to go to art school. It just took me.
The psychology just went.
The psychology just went.
Oh, okay.
And then when I, happened to have earned enough money that I could fund myself, I went and did what I wanted to do, which was to go to art school. And I ended up with an MA in fine art printmaking at the age of almost 40.
Yes, well, it's good. I tell you, you've got to do it, haven't you? Really?
Yeah.
Follow your sort of instincts and dreams. Then, from then, just briefly, you are a member of the Sound as well, though, aren't you? For the first period. So did that feel a bit like the apprenticeship was the bit before that with the Crazies and various, working with the Outsiders, and then the Sound? Did that feel like, oh dear, well, I've gone up to sixth form or university?
Not at first, although moving from, just playing odd bits of clarinet on and, not making noises on the Outsiders and the Crazies, I think moving to working on tracks from beginning with keyboards was a big step up.
Yes. And did because on that first album, is it Jeopardy?
Jeopardy,
which has some amazing songs. Did you also sort of recognise that the songwriting and production and the general sort of quality of it had improved and quite a huge amount?
Well, I think because we were still working with Nick Robbins, it felt much the same. I mean, Nick recorded the Crazies, so moving to do onto the sound, we had already worked with Nick, so it didn't actually feel that different.
Yes,
I think what felt different was Adrian's attitude was very different. He was much more concerned with this being the vehicle that would fund the other smaller projects, and therefore had to be, much more serious.
Yes. So, yeah, does that feel, only 40 years ago now, 41, that's amazing. Does that feel quite strange that what you did back then has, like the Spotify play, monthly listen to the sound is incredible. I seem to remember sort of looking at it recently thinking, I don't know, some massive number. Do you feel quite kind of intrigued that the music you played and was performed on has just grown with its kind of over the years and decades?
Yes, I mean, when you record it, you certainly have no idea that, decades later it will still be listened to. You think you're making music there and then at the moment, for the moment.
Yes.
So it is quite odd.
Yes. And then is this with Jeopardy, is this when you also leave kind of the sound? Is this your sort of moment to exit it?
No, I was fired. So
oh, blimey, I didn't know that. I didn't know that sort of. God, that sounds like something. I did an interview with a member of the Go-Betweens, or two of them, and there was a lot of tension there. So yes, oh dear, that's a terrible moment. Did you know it was coming? By the way,
no. They had a meeting, all three of them, and then the following day we were due to play a gig at the Moonlight Club, and the drummer and the roadie turned up with all my gear in the back of the van and rang the doorbell, and I answered the door, and the drummer said to me, "You're sacked, now get in the van."
wow.
So
God.
But it had been extremely toxic, the atmosphere within the sound, for a while, especially on the supporting tour of Echo and the Bunnymen. It had really, our relationships had become quite strained.
Yes, gee. And it's such a shame because it was not, from an outsider's point of view, you think, my God, they're kind of the Bunnymen. They must have been, it must have been magic. And that was just a toxic time. And yes, cheesy, crazy. Actually, there was a member of BIS, BIS. There was a three-piece from Scotland, and I did an interview with her, and she said, "Oh, it's such a shame because she was in a relationship with one of the members, and she said all those kind of moments of their glory days were them having domestic arguments and literally punching each other backstage, and then going out on Top of the Pops and singing." And she said, now she just thought, if only we could have been having a nice time, but that wasn't to be. So there you go. Behind that mascara and makeup, it's all just toxic, isn't it?
No, it can be, and it was. But I think, looking back, I think that was the start of Adrian's kind of mental problems. They were beginning then, and I just don't think any of us really knew it for what it was.
Yes.
He just was becoming quite difficult and quite moody, and it was really, really sad. And it's terrible when you're in a band with people that you regard as your friends, and then all of a sudden, you're no longer you're not just not part of the band, you're not part of that group of friends anymore.
Yes.
So it does feel kind of really major.
No, God, it would be heartbreaking at that age, wouldn't it? It'd be heartbreaking at any age, but I think with age, with sort of the passing of time, you become a bit more cynical, and you try not to be bitter about everything, but you do sort of have a certain a few more experiences that sort of slightly give you a bit more awareness. But the innocence of youth, can be quite hard to cope with when you have those knocks. But you kind of have to have all those knocks, which do happen, really. Does that feel? I mean, when you started doing this project, because obviously Graham was in the band, who was also in the Crazies, and you've got this project. Did you sort of have kind of conversations with him how that felt, or did he know that it was a pretty horrendous thing that happened to you?
I don't think he knew, actually. It was all handled by Dudley and Adrian Borland. I don't think he was really involved in it,
right?
Very much, because we had previously dated, and therefore we were quite. When our relationship ended, we were quite strict with ourselves about keeping any feelings that we had out of the room when it was with discussions about music.
Yes.
And we managed it quite well, so we carried on playing in the same band and everything was fine.
Right. So the power struggle was the Adrian and Dudley, and that was kind of...
Well, I think particularly when Adrian Janes left, which was at the end of basically the end of the Outsiders, the beginning of the Sound, the whole dynamic changed. Because it was the first time I think we were playing with somebody who wasn't a friend, who had, just auditioned and to come to the band. He was also, I think at the time, I don't know, he's 8 years older, which seems to make a huge difference when you're 20 and somebody's 28.
Well, yes, absolutely.
It makes a huge, huge difference. We had totally different tastes in music. We had totally different ambitions for what we wanted, both musically and for the band. And the whole dynamic changed.
Yes.
And I think that was the beginning of the end, really.
Yes.
Because it is, then we signed to Warner's, and that was the sort of nail in the coffin.
Yes, the pressure. My God, the pressure. I guess when you were looking at Adrian's behaviour, you just thought that was a young person getting a bit too, I don't know, up themselves. I don't know the technical term, actually. But, at that age...
we used to just... When he used to have a funny turn, and he used to come out with something totally ridiculous, we used to have this saying that, oh, God, rock and roll's gone to his head.
Which is kind of, you would think that, you'd thought, and when you see, probably if you saw young people, you just say, oh, you wouldn't really be linking it to too many other kind of issues, just that kind of the attitude of it all, really. So that
the sort of, the publicity and signing a contract's all gone to his head, that's why he's becoming difficult. And of course, it probably had nothing to do with that at all.
No, there you go. And then when you left the band, did you just literally, was that the end of the kind of musical journey for you, or did you sort of go into anything else? Because I know Adrian Janes, he sort of went back and did his degree and then sort of got a career, and that was it. Did you also have a similar time where you just put the clarinet in the cupboard and went, that's it, I've had enough?
Kind of, but then the Sound had actually got some quite good publicity in the music press. So although they maybe commercially they weren't doing that well in album sales, they got a lot of interest from the music press. And I was approached by quite a lot of other musicians, would you like to come play keyboards with us? And eventually I did join another band called Persian Flowers. And it was great. But then we got to the same stage again where, they wanted everyone to give up everything and, for the band. And these guys were, how shall I put it, quite unreliable because they were heavily into drugs.
Yes, it's going to be drugs, isn't it?
And it was just impossible. I'd turn up. They were based in Plaistow in the East End, and I would turn up from Surrey to Plaistow to rehearse, and they'd all be lying on the floor, just out of it. And once we got this wonderful showcase gig at the venue, and there were something like 8 bands, and we were actually quite close to the top of the set of the list. and they were late to the sound check because they had to go and score on the way to the gig.
Classic.
So we got actually bumped to the first band on, and of course we went on because there were quite a few bands in this showcase gig. We went on stage at 6 in the evening before anybody from any of the music companies had, turned up. So it was just a complete waste of time, and in the end, it just all fizzled out.
It's going to fit. No, it's not going to happen.
But it was great because they had a rhythm guitar. There was a much bigger sound than I was used to, because they actually had a lead guitarist and a rhythm guitarist, and a singer who was just the vocalist. So for me, it was they were wonderful songwriters and they were great songs. And for me, it was wonderful to have all that extra stuff going on. It was a much bigger sound.
Yes.
But the guys just couldn't keep it together.
Oh, the Persian Flowers. What happened to them?
Well, it was Nicole from Wasted Youth was our vocalist.
Oh.
I don't know what happened to them. I think they just fizzled out as well, because I don't think, in the end, it could come to anything. Drugs became more important than music.
I know, it does happen, doesn't it? Especially, I don't know what it's like now, but definitely in the 80s and 90s. It was just like, it was part of the culture, the drinking, smoking, making music. Because it's interesting, having done this show for such a long time, most bands have that 5-year narrative, they get together, honeymoon period, it's going well, they get a single if they can. John Peel gives it a play, then they get John Peel session, things are going really well. And then, a bit of a tour around the country in the back of a vehicle, which they love, because you get to visit all those exotic places like Norwich, Leeds. And then you have the album.
What we call the toilet circuit.
The toilet art circuit, which is often on a Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday when no one else wants the venue. And then the album can be a bit tricky, and then the second album is like, wow, good luck, guys. That's like, yes. And so you get the gist, don't you? Well, I do. You think, because there's a kind of the dynamic and a complete lack of money. And apart from that, it's great, isn't it?
But do you not find, though, when you look back, how many albums by bands that you like, is it the first album that you like more than any of the others? Because I look back and I think, Psychedelic Furs, first album. Perubu, first album. Roxy Music, definitely the first album.
Yeah, there is quite a pattern. There is a lot, especially a lot of the 80s indie bands, I would say, because there was often that like, wow, you really captured it, and then the tricky now what. Whereas there are a few artists and bands, though the Smiths' first album was really bad because of the recording and the production. They had to, re-record it quickly because it just sounded terrible. And people like David Bowie spent the 60s making some really forgettable music. And then it was like, oh my God, he's learned to do it, but he did, you look at his, I love Bowie. That's my obsession. But, it's like, I listen, I think you were making this record at the same time, Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, and you presented us with this. This is just really Anthony Neely. What?
Yes, exactly.
It was like really.
I Love You Till Tuesday and The Laughing Gnome.
Yeah, no, it's like, so you could have gone, going to a record shop, Jimi Hendrix, are you experienced? Oh no, the Love You Till Tuesday, David Bowie play, it's like, oh, great mime, and then it was like you would not see that coming. So it's kind of an interesting, but I agree with majority of the time you get the gist. You think this is great, and
because there's no pressures. You're actually doing what you want. You probably haven't signed. You're probably playing quite a lot live, so it becomes quite polished and it's really well worked on.
And the songs that you've written are probably the ones that you've been working on quite a long time. So with a lot of bands, it's like, if it does work, there is that like, okay, we need another album next year, because that's how it works. Because frankly, we don't want to tell you this too much, but in 5 years' time, no one will care about you. So sorry about that, because that is true as well. That's why it's like, don't spend 5 years, because that group of people who like you now they're going to be doing other things in 5 years' time. They've moved on, and the next group of 16 to 18-year-olds will not care about you. So it's that kind of, you've got all your thoughts and ideas in that first album, really, and then it's just a case of seeing what happens. And it was interesting because kind of Suzanne Vega sort of recorded her first album, and it was like, oh my God, it's really amazing, and it's worked well, sells, phenomenal amount. And it's like, right, back in the studio, what have you got? And it's like, absolutely nothing. It's like, shit, what are we going to do? We have to get the album out because, again, no one's going to, your fan base will just dwindle and disappear. So, the creative process must be quite hard for people to realize that that's what's going to be the gig. But you don't know you're going to make it. You haven't got that kind of, this is. No,
but I think the first album, because you don't think you don't know you're going to make it, or you don't even think you're going to make it, you don't feel any pressure to conform or to provide something that's expected. You just do what you want to do.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think often you see the true personality of a band in their first recording before they have to kind of, as you say, write to a formula or get assigned a producer or, all the things that I think ruin the sound of a band.
Yes, I think there is a really difficult, for a band who wants to continue beyond that kind of few years, it is really difficult. And there's a few who have done it, whether, one likes them or not. But I'm sort of impressed that anybody can keep it going, because there is going to be a bit where your fans have just disappeared, really. And God knows how you're going to make it. But, like the Rolling Stones or U2. But, they're, it's like you could debate the music, but you think, God, you've stuck with it, which is unbelievable, really, because you've had to stick with each other's personalities through all those experiences. I mean, God, what a thought.
And it's probably not just that, but it's, the more successful you become, probably the more studio time you're given and the more gizmos you're given and the bigger the budget. And I think people get lost in that side of things.
Yes.
And actually the creativity comes sometimes from having to make do with what you've got.
Yes.
And having to adapt, to make something. I mean, the early second layer was quite amazing, because I used to sit in sometimes when Graham and Adrian were rehearsing. And often Graham would turn up with these little boxes that just made noises that he built, because there just wasn't anything out there that would do it. It promotes, I think, at the beginning, the lack of budget and the lack of access to, whatever's out there forces you to think really outside the box.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to be much more creative.
Kind of, yes. So there you go. The Crazies, that recording session in one day just captured everything and more, which is, I mean, it must be so surreal, especially Cherry Red bringing out this incredible box set of the Outsiders as well. You just think, you're not going to quite believe this, but it's like, look at it. This has been my youth, which I'd really never thought it would be interested. So you're going to, and the great thing is with both of those, releases, is that there will be people around the world who are sort of constantly picking up, because doing some massive research. I just looked at Spotify, I'm like, oh, look at the sound. They've just got, I think it was 130,000 listens a month. And it's like, wow, that's a lot of fans. That's a lot of people who are kind of, and then they go, oh, what else? Oh my God, they're in this and they're in this. So it is kind of interesting that you suddenly find yourself. And I suppose with Adrian, there is a sort of now this cult status about him and his work, and people making little films about him and stuff, which must feel also a bit strange, because obviously you realise it comes to a horrendous kind of end, which is horrible, actually, isn't it? So, yes. Did you, when the news kind of broke and you found out, did you kind of talk to the other members of the band to sort of have some sort of kind of, not support, but just kind of processing of all that?
No, not at all, actually, because I was not in touch with Dudley. I think Graham was in the States by then. So no, not really. I mean, it was really strange. I think his mother rang me to let me know what had happened. but
Yes.
it wasn't his first attempt. So there was an element of surprise, but there was also not an element of surprise,
Yeah.
because he had several attempts prior to, the last one.
Yeah, no, it's horrible. Just the thought of it, isn't it, really? So, yes. But so look, if you could have said something to your like 16 to 18-year-old self who was kind of starting out in that creative process, not only music, but painting and art and everything else, is there something you would have just kind of wanted to whisper in their ear with the experience and the wisdom, or something like wisdom that you've built up over the years? I just wondered if there was something you'd have thought, God, I would have just sort of given them a few pointers, a few bullet points.
I think, people are always asking me, because the sound for me ended up so badly, whether if I knew that's, was going to be what happened, would I still go back and do it? And I think the answer is no, I wouldn't. In all honesty, I just couldn't go through that. It was just too toxic. And I think at the time, I obviously needed an outlet for creativity, and I thought maybe music would be it. And then realized much later that actually visual arts was a good outlet also.
Yes.
So maybe I'd go back and say to my younger self, no, don't play with the sound, let it go, because you'll find an outlet for your creativity elsewhere.
My God. Did you sort of feel with that kind of horrible toxic moment, did it take a while to process that, to kind of let go, as they sometimes say?
It was weird, because I had to, having been sacked when I was picked up to go to a gig, and then having to play a gig knowing that, my days were numbered, was actually the weirdest feeling, to go on stage and have to put in a performance having just been sacked. Because I think if it hadn't been the Moonlight Club, I might have said no. In that case, F off, I'm not doing it.
Yes.
But the Moonlight Club, the guy who ran it was really a fan. He was a really nice guy. We had we had regulars who would turn up to see us, because we played there quite often. And there was this feeling of, it's not fair to let all these other people down. They're expecting us to play. So I better go and play. But I had to say I didn't feel like it.
No, my God. Yes, there you go.
And also my equipment was in the van. So there was also this feeling of, if I don't get in the van, when am I going to see my gear?
Yeah, I know. I would have had the same thought, actually. I thought, they'll just chuck it in the bin, won't they? Bastards.
Or they'll be auditioning my replacement using my gear. No, thank you.
Yeah, God. And was that the last time you basically saw the band, was on stage?
Yeah, well, they had fired me without having a replacement. So their manager and Adrian Borland had to then come to me and say, could you play the next few gigs, which are in the diary, until we find your replacement? At which point I said, well, I will, but you need to pay me as if I'm a session musician in that case, because I'm not doing it for nothing.
Yes.
And that was probably at that time the best salary I had earned. So I negotiated myself a 50 quid a gig deal to actually, help them out, as it were.
My God, they were completely nuts, weren't they, actually?
Well, but the thing was, I had no idea that Adrian was mentally ill. And I think he probably just lost his temper and something happened and he made this on-the-spot decision. Because many years later, when I met him, because, we did actually pick up again and we did have some kind of relationship post his illness, he kept saying to me, but why did you leave? Why did you not kind of put up a fight? So I don't know whether, it was meant to be, was I meant to be sacked? Or was it just, a bit of a poke because they didn't like what I'd done, or, and I was supposed to put up some kind of fight? I have no idea.
Yes, that's
And all,
that. As they say, that is mixed messages, isn't it? Really, let's face it. It's quite clear if you're being fired. I don't think they say, look, we're not happy. You need to do something. You say, oh, okay, then perhaps they've got a
no, but there
point.
was nothing. I
No.
mean, the drummer just said to me, Dudley just said to me, we don't like it because you've been too friendly with the Bunnymen on the last tour, and that's disloyal to the sound.
Oh my God! So there was that. It was that. Blimey.
It was, yeah, that was part of the reason. Apparently, was
Yeah.
that I had actually talked to the headlining band and been quite friendly with them.
God, that's hardly Judas, but I mean, geezy, crazy.
It was weird.
Yes.
Weird times.
I would imagine it would have been much nicer to talk to a different band actually at this stage anyway, from your
It's just, you're going to be on the road with these guys. I think if I remember correctly, it was something like it was a 22 or 23 gig tour, and the first 19 nights were consecutive nights.
Yes. That is
You're
rock
going
and
to be
roll.
with these guys kind of like every day. So
Yes.
it's going to be much nicer if you can kind of cooperate and be, civil with each other, and it's just going to go so much better for everyone.
And at that stage with those gigs, because the Bunnymen were obviously this was kind of their honeymoon period. Was it an amazing atmosphere on this university circuit? Was this that particular gig, or was it the one that Bill Drummond had put together?
Bill Drummond was there, so I don't know whether he had put it together, but I know that Kurova's idea was that they had just signed two bands who had just brought out their first albums. Therefore, why not combine the two and put them both out on tour together?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it worked that well for the Bunnymen, because I think they were already better known than we were.
Yeah.
Their album was quite slick. They had a much bigger following, and they probably could have earned money by getting someone to buy onto the tour. And just being told by Kurova that no, you're going to take, the sound along, probably wasn't, great for them.
Yeah. God,
which was why I thought, one ought to be a little bit more gracious and accept that, they were being kind, actually accepting to Kurova's idea.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can just remember those early years of the Bunnymen. I mean, that period was kind of they suddenly they came out of that Liverpool scene, Eric's, didn't they? And they were one of the bands who just had that kind of quality, which made them look very good. And in a way, it was when the Smiths appeared, I thought, in '83, where they had almost lost that kind of momentum, and the Smiths came along as if to say, "There's a new kid in town, and it's going to be us." So yeah, it's an interesting period. But yeah, the Bunnymen tour must have, and also working that hard for sort of a month must have just absolutely fried everybody, really.
Oh, I mean, at that time, I think I had strep throat. I kept having infections of strep throat. And if it hadn't been for their crew, I would never have survived that tour, because their road manager was taking my temperature every night, and he was saying, if it gets over 102, you're not going on stage. I'm not having it. I'm not going to be responsible for somebody, somebody really sick on this tour. So, they actually, I think if they hadn't been quite so good, I'd never have made it.
No.
Because I did have a temperature of 102 and 103, I think, one night. And the only reason that I made it through that tour was because their road manager used to have a word with the roadies, their road crew, and say, look, can one of you sleep on the floor and give your bed up, because, that their keyboard player is really sick. Which was very kind, but it did feel slightly uncomfortable sharing a bed with a man I'd never met before.
God,
but they were actually really, really kind, and they looked after me and made sure that I survived the tour.
Yes, my God, you've got great rock and roll stories, haven't you? This is just and I bet their tour bus was much better as well than the sound.
Well, I never went in the tour bus, because what used to happen was that I would turn up, whatever, the sound never booked anything. We had to sleep in the back of the van. So what would happen would be that that I would just meet them back at the hotel. I'd be told which roadie's room was being, prepared for me. And then the following morning, I'd kind of make it back to the sound van, and on we'd go to the next, gig. But it meant that at least I had, a good night's sleep.
Absolutely.
And was fit for the, or either was not going to collapse the following night on stage.
God, you get to an age, you need a proper mattress. You can't be faffing about, can you, really, with just crappy stuff? Let's face it.
So, that was what led to a huge row, which I think also probably helped to get me fired, was that...
Yes, you had a good mattress.
I went, after the Bunnymen tour, I went storming into Corova and actually abused Greg Penny, who was, in charge of us, as opposed to the Bunnymen who Rob Dickens was looking after. And, I said to him, you knew that I had strep throat, and you said that we would be put up in B&Bs, and, the first gig that we go on, Adrian's appealing for somebody in the audience to give us a floor to sleep on, what the hell's been going on? And it turned out that Corova had given Adrian Borland £2,000 for accommodation, and Adrian just thought, oh, we don't really need this, and just banked it. So, I called Greg Penny every name under the sun, and the poor man had honoured his decision, and he had actually given the money for us to be in B&Bs.
There you go. God, I tell you, the murky world, isn't it? Rock and roll.
Yeah.
Yes, but anyway, you kind of survived it. But thank God you were sort of, yes, the Bunnymen. Every time you must hear the Cutter or the Back of Love, you must think, they saved my ass. They just saved me.
Yeah, they saved my ass, but also they were brilliantly funny. I mean, they were. Will and Mac were just, they were much like me, where they had their lives back in their hometown, and they were out on the road. They were there to do a job, and they just wanted to do the best they could, and they were missing, their partners at home. Yes. So we actually had quite a lot in common. And they were just really very nice guys to talk to.
Yes. Well, yes, I know. It's funny. It sounds like The Sound was quite a toxic little number, wasn't it, really?
It was.
Yeah, because most bands, even the Smiths, who were, obviously having a love affair with them, was quite interesting later years. But you got the feeling there was this kind of a kind of harmonious gang who were looking out for each other, and at least had that period. It was just what happened next. Whereas the Sound didn't even seem to have a honeymoon period. It sounded more, tricky, really.
Yeah, well, I think Adrian's parents were quite heavily involved in what he did. I mean, he was their only child, so I think they were super protective. And I think they had quite a lot of input also in what was happening. And I think when somebody interferes, it kind of rocks things. It rocks the dynamic within, within the band.
Yes, we could see that with the Beatles, really, couldn't we? There was by the end, they were all looking a bit strained in the studio, looking at each other and wondering who all these extra people in the studio are. Yes, and also we saw Spinal Tap, where you get sort of like partners coming with knitted jumpers and ideas of, Stonehenge and things. It's not going to happen, is it? It's like, yeah. And then
I don't think it was that. I think it was more that, the strange thing with Jeopardy is I think we should have called it A Day After Jeopardy, because the way we worked always was that somebody would come in with an idea, usually Adrian, but not always, for a song, and then we'd just start jamming, and people would, put in their contributions, and it would go through almost like a filtration system. Every time you ran through, that works, that doesn't work, and it was very democratic. Yeah. And what you ended with at the end was something that everyone had contributed to, and that had gone through all this, filtration by every single member. Yes. And originally it was going to be, all the songs will be credited to the Sound. And the Graham and I had no idea until we were presented with a copy that was not the case. So on the day Jeopardy came out, you looked at it and going, my name's not on any of these writing credits. I'm not credited anywhere.
Yeah, that's not good, is it, really? I guess,
So
was it the case it just had Graham's, Adrian's name on, written
yes,
by? Yes.
yes, and there was I think he came under a lot of pressure from his parents that, well, you're the one doing all the work, so why are you assigning, rights away to other people? But they had no idea on how we worked.
Yes.
So, that, for me, I think when Jeopardy came out, it was a real kind of stab in the back, almost, a sort of like, well, that's not how we work.
Yes. And I think most bands realise that you just got to say, we've got to have that conversation to be really clear. But then, if you are recording or creating something as a collective, it's going to be as a collective, really, isn't it? Whether you write the lyrics or whatever, it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the other members. So you kind of...
Well, I think the lyrics were always going to be Adrian's. Nobody ever contributed to the lyrics. But
yes.
The music was actually supposed to be by the band, all of us equally, because that's the way we worked. But, it just, as I say, I didn't realise until the album came out that, that he'd reneged on that. So you pick up the album and you go, oh, I've just got one credit for Jeopardy. For the track Jeopardy,
Yes.
Well, what the hell?
Have you ever, I mean, because it's one of those curious things. Do you ever sort of get like a £5 royalty check or, 20?
Yes, I do.
That must be very exciting when that happens.
Yes, and because in the end, the sound was such an unpleasant experience, whenever I got a royalty check from the sound, I gave the money away because it made me feel better. It was tainted. So I think the last time I got a check, and it was for sort of 50 quid, I went round town and I was walking around and I'd cashed it. And this homeless guy came up and he said, would you like to buy a poem? And I paid him 50 quid for it. I thought. And then I went away happy thinking, all that awful stuff I put up with the sound has made somebody else really happy.
Yes, and like, God, I must go and write another poem. It might happen again. It's like, yes, that poor person. Yeah. Well, no, they were happy for a day, but God, well, no, it's a good thing. I mean, yes, I mean, is it the case you can listen to any of this? Do you just avoid the whole kind of listening to anything?
I don't listen to the sound at all, hardly ever. I mean, I got some kind of box set, I think, that came out of a lot of sound material, and it's still in cellophane. Yes. I've not even opened it.
It would be hard.
The Crazies, as I say, is completely different.
Yeah, no, it sounds like the sort of thing that everyone should have in that experience, really, and a good experience at that. So that's brilliant. Yes. Well, look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this. It's been amazing. And, congratulations on the Crazies kind of album coming out, which is on special vinyl color, as well, which is, it's, pushing the boat out. And Optic Nerve Records from Preston has just done so well. They've built up such a kind of cult following now, haven't they? So,
oh God, yeah. Because I mean, I looked at, I often don't look at labels and things anymore. And, I kind of looked at their back catalogue and I was like, oh, the monochrome set. Now I love the monochrome set. So yes. Looking through what they'd done that, was that I liked and thinking, oh, actually. And then I spoke to Ian Alcock and we started talking about bands we'd seen and bands we liked. And, it was like, oh, the only ones. Oh, the Psychedelic Furs. And we suddenly realised that we had such a similar musical taste that it was like, oh, great, I'm so glad we're working together. And he was very good with the cover because, being more in fine art, and I had no idea about, bleed lines for printers and things when I was doing the cover. So he was actually really helpful on, all the little details that he guided me on, sent me the format that things had to fit into with all the measurements for all the bleed lines and things that I needed to have. Yes. And he was quite helpful, but he gave me total freedom to do what I wanted, which was also wonderful.
God, it sounds like a fantastic project and quite surreal, really. You must have had a lot of interest and dreams around that stage.
Well, because I'd known the influence behind Pete Williams's lyrics, in a way, I felt, I was in a really unique position to do the album sleeve. And I guess that, I sort of said to the guys, do you want me, I can put forward some suggestions. If you don't like them, fine, go elsewhere.
Mm.
So in the end, I did like 3 different designs. And then it was quite a democratic process. And, they picked, we discussed it, they picked the one they liked the best. But Ian Alcott gave me total freedom.
There you go.
To do what I wanted. And then at the last minute, he says, oh, by the way, we need an inner sleeve. And oh, by the way, would you like to do the labels for the album as well? It sort of grew and grew, but it was great fun to do.
I would imagine.
And, as I say, knowing the background to Pete's lyrics meant that I knew where to look for the images.
So yes, that's good. That's good. Do you now have a copy of it? Has that been printed? Oh my God, you've got it. Jeezy crazy. That's brilliant, isn't it? It's funny because just lastly, I did an interview with a member.
But it was, it was really.
Sorry, I said because there was another band on that label called the Hangman's Beautiful Daughters. And again, they did recording in the late 80s in London in squats and stuff, and got on with the rest of their life. And then Optic Nerve went, oh, we've got enough for an album. So that's kind of come out, and they've kind of gone, blimey, I can't, God, we did this, and completely forgot about it. And now that's been released on Optic Nerve. So they're certainly creating an awful lot of kind of people kind of reflecting back at those kind of years when they did their sort of time in a band, really. So it's good, actually.
I'm pleased for Pete, though, as well, because, the lyrics were just so weird and so wonderful in a way. And it was, I thoroughly enjoyed putting them into, visual form. Yes. And I knew, and as I say, I knew where a lot of it had come from, which newspaper stories he'd used as inspiration. So I went back and looked at some of those images from the papers.
And got it. You got the essence of the material. That's brilliant. Yeah. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to B. Marshall for giving me the time for that interview. This has been David Eastaugh, the C86 show. And as I said, the Crazies, the album is coming out, or is out, on Optic Nerve Records from Preston, a Simple Vision LP. Do check it out. And also The Outsiders, I think that was a 5 CD box set that also came out. That was on Cherry Red Records, and it is very, very good. So there you go. Christmas around the corner and all that. Anyway, if you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 show. Keep it positive and groovy, frankly, Mr. Shankly. And yes, all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Check it out. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.